names to avoid: Sarah Brennan, Thomas Brennan, Helen Brennan, Raymond Halloran, Claire Donovan, Marcus Whitfield, Captain Reyes, Vivian Ashford. Now writing the full story, new characters, new setting, same proven formula. My brother said it loud enough for the entire gate to hear. "You really think wearing that old jacket makes you something special?" I didn't answer. I just picked up my carry-on and kept walking toward the jetway. The same way I'd learned to walk through every room where someone wanted me to shrink. Chin level, shoulders back, eyes forward. My brother Daniel had a gift for finding the exact sentence that would hollow you out, and he'd been using it on me since we were kids, sharing a bedroom in Dayton, Ohio. He knew every weak point. He'd mapped them over 30 years. I was 32 years old that morning. I had spent 6 of those years in the United States Army, 2 of them deployed and 3 more after separation working as a structural engineer for a federal infrastructure firm in Columbus. I was not, by any reasonable measure, someone who should have been made to feel small at Gate 14 of LaGuardia Airport. But Daniel had a way of collapsing all of that into nothing with just his voice and his timing. We were flying home to Dayton for our mother's retirement party. She'd worked 31 years as an office administrator at the school district, and the whole family was gathering. Daniel had flown in from Seattle, where he ran some kind of marketing consultancy that he described differently depending on who was asking. He wore a Patagonia vest and carried a bag that probably cost more than my first car. The jacket he was mocking was my old Army field jacket, worn in, faded at the elbows. I wore it because it was November and I was cold, and because, honestly, I just liked it. It was mine in a way very few things felt like mine anymore. I found my seat, 14C, aisle, and stowed my bag and sat down. Daniel was 2 rows behind me, which was exactly far enough. I could still hear him laughing at something on his phone. I put in my earbuds and stared out across the tarmac. I had a rule I'd given myself after I got out. Don't explain yourself to people who have already decided what you are. Daniel had decided I was a cautionary tale somewhere around the time I enlisted instead of going to graduate school. In his version of my life, I had made a series of prideful, impractical choices, and the jacket was just the latest evidence. That I now had a PE license, that I had been lead engineer on a bridge rehabilitation project in rural West Virginia that came in under budget and ahead of schedule, that I had a security clearance and a professional reputation that had nothing to do with him, none of that existed in Daniel's version. So I didn't argue. I just sat. The flight to Dayton was 45 minutes. I was planning to read. I was planning to arrive at my mother's house, help set up the folding tables in the backyard, eat too much potato salad, and survive the weekend without incident. That was the plan. We'd been in the air maybe 12 minutes when I felt it. Not heard it. Felt it. A shudder that started somewhere under my feet and moved up through the seat. Then the sound, a low, grinding concussion, like something inside the aircraft had decided to argue with itself. The plane tilted just a degree or 2, and then the PA system clicked on and a flight attendant's voice came through, professionally calm in a way that sets every nerve in your body on fire, precisely because of how calm it is. "Ladies and gentlemen, the captain has turned on the fasten seatbelt sign. Please return to your seats." That was all, but I knew that sound, not from aviation, from structures. From the moment a load-bearing element fails and everything above it starts to redistribute weight in directions it was never designed to go. I had heard that particular quality of wrongness twice in my career, once in a parking structure inspection in Cleveland, once in a highway overpass in rural Kentucky, and both times I had been right about what I heard. Something had failed. I took out one earbud and listened. The engine sounded uneven, not gone, but wrong. One of them was laboring in a register it shouldn't have been laboring in. The flight attendant, a woman in her 40s named I'd noticed when I boarded, Dana, walked past me toward the front of the plane with the fast, controlled stride of someone who is not running but very much wants to. She glanced at me as she passed. I don't know why. Maybe it was something in my face. I wasn't panicking. I was just listening, the way I always listened when something didn't sound right. 3 minutes later, she came back. She stopped at my row. "Ma'am," she said quietly, leaning in, the captain wants to know if there's a passenger named Calloway on this flight. Nora Calloway." I looked at her. "That's me." Something moved across her face. Relief, maybe, or the very careful management of it. "Could you come with me, please? Here's what I need to explain, because otherwise none of what happened next makes sense. 14 months before that flight, I had been part of an emergency response team deployed to a collapsed pedestrian bridge in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. It was a cable-stayed structure, relatively new, that had failed under combined ice load and deferred maintenance. A situation that should never have been allowed to develop but did, because the inspection reports had been misread and the flagged deficiencies had been categorized as low priority by someone in a state office who didn't understand what they were reading. 7 people were on the bridge when it came down. 2 of them were critically injured. My firm sent me because I knew that bridge. I'd reviewed the original design documents 2 years prior as part of a federal audit. I knew where the failure points were before I arrived on site. I coordinated with the emergency structural team, the fire department's rescue division, and a Federal Highway Administration inspector named Jim Okafor, who became over the course of that 48-hour operation someone I trusted completely. What I did in Harrisburg was my job. I read the structure, I identified the secondary collapse risk before it happened and got the rescue team repositioned in time. Everyone who could be saved was saved. Jim Okafor filed a report. That report went to the Federal Aviation Administration, not because aviation had anything to do with it, but because one of the engineers copied on the distribution list happened to work in both infrastructure and aviation safety consulting, and he flagged my name. My background, my Army service, my specific training in rapid structural assessment under crisis conditions. A few months after Harrisburg, I received a request to be part of an informal federal registry, a database of engineers and technical specialists who could potentially assist in aviation emergencies. It was voluntary. It was rare. It was, apparently, the kind of thing that exists quietly and that almost no one ever hears about unless they're in a very specific corner of federal infrastructure work. I said yes. I filled out the forms. I went through a background review that took 11 weeks, and then I forgot about it more or less, because nothing came of it, and life went on. Until Dana leaned into my row at 32,000 feet and said the captain was asking for me by name. The cockpit was smaller than I expected, though I'd known the dimensions intellectually. The first officer, a young man named, his name tag read Garrett, was managing the controls with the focused stillness of someone doing math in their head. The captain was older, maybe 55, with the kind of face that had been weathered into steadiness over decades. "Ms. Calloway," he said, and his voice was the same voice I'd heard on the PA. Controlled. "I'm Captain O.C. I need your assessment of something." He explained quickly and precisely what had happened. A hydraulic failure in the system controlling the right thrust reverser. In itself, not catastrophic, they'd isolated it, but the isolation procedure had created a secondary issue with the pitch trim, and he was getting conflicting data from 2 of his instruments. He needed someone who could think clearly about a mechanical discrepancy under pressure. His first officer was managing the aircraft. He needed a second mind on the instrumentation problem. "I'm a structural engineer," I said, "not an aviation engineer." "I know what you are," he said. He held my eyes. "Can you read a load distribution problem?" I looked at the instruments he was pointing to. And here is the thing about engineering, the thing Daniel never understood and probably never will. The physics don't change based on the domain, load, stress, distribution, failure, cascade. These are not aviation concepts or structural concepts, they are physics. And I had been reading physics under pressure since I was 23 years old, and my sergeant first told me that the bridge we needed to cross had not been inspected in 6 years, and we were going to cross it anyway. Walk me through what you're seeing, I said. He did. I listened. I looked at the numbers. Your trim sensor is reading correctly, I said after about 90 seconds. The discrepancy is in the actuator position indicator. It's giving you a lag because of the hydraulic pressure drop from the first failure. Your actual trim state matches the primary reading, not the secondary. Captain Osei looked at First Officer Garrett. Something passed between them. That's consistent with what I was thinking, Garrett said quietly. Then we proceed on the primary, Captain Osei said. He looked back at me. Ms. Proceed on the primary, Captain Osei said. He looked back at me. Calloway, I'm going to ask you to stay up here for the remainder of the descent, if you're willing. I was willing. The landing at Dayton was not dramatic. That is the truth of most engineering. The successful interventions are not dramatic, because the whole point is to prevent the drama. We came in on the primary instruments. The trim behaved exactly as I predicted, and Captain Osei set the aircraft down with a firmness and precision that made the wheels sound like a period at the end of a very long sentence. There were fire trucks on the runway. There were airport emergency vehicles lined up along the taxiway. The passengers didn't know why, most of them, though a few pressed their faces to the windows. I walked back through the cabin after we'd stopped. I didn't look at Daniel. I didn't need to. They held us on the aircraft for 20 minutes while the ground crew assessed the hydraulic system. Airport operations wanted a statement from the captain, and the captain wanted one from me, and there was a representative from the FAA field office at Dayton who arrived in a gray SUV while I was still sitting in the gate area with a cup of terrible airport coffee, trying to decide if what had just happened was real. It was real. My hands were steadier than I expected. They'd been steady the whole time, actually. In the cockpit, during the descent, through the landing. That was the Army, or maybe it was something older than that, something I'd been born with, and that Daniel had spent 30 years trying to convince me was a flaw. The FAA representative, a woman named Agent Patricia Lung, sat across from me at a gate area table and asked me to describe my involvement. I did. She wrote things down, she was professional and thorough, and she thanked me when we were done. The captain's report will note your assistance, she said. For what it's worth, the way you described the actuator lag, that matched exactly what the maintenance team found. I nodded. For what it's worth, she said again, and this time it seemed like she actually meant it to be worth something. You helped keep 112 people safe today. 112. I thought about that. I thought about the woman 3 rows behind me who'd been knitting. I thought about the kid across the aisle who'd been playing a game on a tablet. I thought about Daniel, 2 rows behind me, who had said loud enough for the whole gate to hear that my old jacket made me think I was something special. I didn't say any of this to Agent Lung. I just said thank you and finished my coffee. My mother's retirement party was the next afternoon. We held it in my aunt's backyard in Kettering, the house my grandmother had owned, with the big oak in the corner and the uneven brick patio that my grandfather had laid himself in 1974, and that had been slowly losing the argument with gravity ever since. I spent the morning helping my mother and my aunt carry things from the kitchen. Folding tables, a plastic tablecloth with sunflowers on it, a cooler full of seltzers and iced tea. My mother kept touching my arm, which she'd been doing since I got to her house the night before after the airport. She'd seen the local news. She hadn't said anything about it directly. She just kept touching my arm. Daniel arrived late. He'd changed his flight, I assumed, or rented a car, or made some arrangement. I didn't know and didn't ask. He came around the side of the house with his vest and his bag and his particular walk, the walk of a man who has decided that the space he takes up in a room is a form of achievement. He got a plate of food. He talked to cousins. He laughed at things. He was, in the way he always was at family gatherings, aggressively present. At some point in the early afternoon, my uncle, my mother's brother, a retired machinist named Walt, who had always been the person in our family most likely to say exactly what he was thinking, sat down next to Daniel at one of the folding tables. I was across the yard. I wasn't trying to hear them. But Walt's voice carries. You see the news last night? Walt said. Daniel said something I couldn't catch. Your sister, Walt said. They talked about her on the news. Something about a flight out of LaGuardia. A pause. Something about an emergency landing, Walt said. She helped the pilot. Another pause, longer. Huh, Daniel said. That was it. That was the whole word. Huh. The sound of a story collapsing around a person who didn't expect to be inside it. I looked away. I didn't want to watch his face, not because I was being generous, but because I realized I didn't actually need to. The watching was the part of the revenge fantasy that I'd always told myself I needed. The seeing of the expression, the proof that he understood what he'd dismissed. But standing in my aunt's backyard, with the oak tree and the tilted bricks and my mother's hand on my arm, I understood that I already had everything I needed. I had had it before I ever got on that plane. What happened at 32,000 feet didn't change who I was. It just made it briefly undeniable to the people who'd been choosing not to see. 3 weeks after the Dayton flight, I received a formal letter from the FAA commending my assistance during the incident. It was addressed to Nora Calloway, P.E., and it used that title the way it was meant to be used, as a description of something I had earned, document by document, examination by examination, year by year. I framed it, not to show anyone, just because it felt like a thing worth framing. I also received an email from Captain Ossie. It was short. He thanked me for my steadiness. He said, and I've read this sentence more times than I'll admit. In 30 years of flying, I have asked for help from a passenger exactly once. I am glad it was you. I wrote back. I thanked him. I told him I was glad the physics worked out. He wrote back once more after that. He said his youngest daughter was starting college next year and was considering engineering. I wrote her a letter. I told her it was one of the best decisions she could make. I told her the physics don't lie, even when people do. I told her the work would ask everything of her on the worst days, and that on those days the work itself would be the answer, if she let it be. I don't know if she read it. I hope she did. My mother retired on a Friday in November, and on the following Monday she signed up for a watercolor class at the rec center in Kettering, which was exactly what she'd been planning to do for 11 years. She sent me photos of her first painting, a bowl of oranges that looked, if I'm being honest, more like a bowl of small suns. And I put it as my phone wallpaper and kept it there. Daniel and I don't talk much. We didn't talk much before. That morning at LaGuardia, the thing he said about my jacket. I thought about why that one landed the way it did. Why I still remembered the exact pitch of his voice when I sat down in 14C. I think it was the timing, standing at a gate, about to go home, tired in a way that has nothing to do with sleep. In that state, the familiar cruelties find the gaps they've always known were there. But here's what I know now, that I maybe only half believed before. The gaps don't define the structure. Every engineer learns this early. The question is never whether a load-bearing element will be stressed. The question is whether the structure was built well enough to carry the load when it comes. I was built well enough. I know that now in a way that doesn't require anyone else to confirm it. The jacket, by the way, I still wear. It's even more worn now. The left elbow has gone soft at the seam, and I've been meaning to patch it, but honestly, I kind of like it this way. It looks like something that's been through things and kept going. That's the only kind of jacket worth wearing. People ask me sometimes what it felt like walking up that aisle toward the cockpit. They expect something cinematic, a surge of confidence, a jaw set with purpose, a moment where everything clicks into clarity. That's not what it was. What it was, honestly, was just one foot in front of the other, the same thing it had always been. I think about cause and effect a lot now, more than I used to. Not in a fatalistic way, not like the universe had scripted any of it, more like every choice has a shape, and the shape accumulates over time whether you're watching it or not. Every hour I spent in uniform, every inspection report I filed at 2 in the morning, every examination I passed when I was too tired to feel proud of it, all of it had a shape. And on a November morning at 32,000 feet, that shape turned out to fit exactly the problem in front of me. Daniel's choices had a shape too. That's the part I've had to sit with. He didn't end up standing in that gate area saying what he said because he was born cruel. He got there the same way anyone gets anywhere. Incrementally, one small decision at a time, each one making the next one easier. Every time he chose to diminish instead of ask. Every time he mistook confidence for arrogance and competence for luck. It accumulates. It always accumulates. I am not saying he deserved what happened. I'm not interested in what anyone deserves. What I'm saying is that cause and effect doesn't care about intentions. You build what you build, and eventually you have to stand inside it. What I know about integrity, real integrity, not the bumper sticker version, is that it is almost entirely invisible most of the time. It doesn't announce itself. It just shows up, quietly, when the situation requires it. Captain Osei didn't call for me because I'd ever told anyone I was capable. He called for me because my name was in a database I'd forgotten about, attached to a record that I had built one unglamorous day at a time over years. The work had been its own testimony long before I ever needed it to speak. That's the thing I'd want anyone to take from Nora's story, from my story. The work you do when no one is watching is not wasted. It's not invisible. It's being recorded somewhere, in the structure of the thing itself, in the way a bridge holds weight or a person holds pressure. You can't fake that. You can fake credentials, fake confidence, fake a resume. But you cannot fake what happens inside you when the instruments are wrong and 40 minutes of flight time is all you have left. Either you can read the problem or you can't. And whether you can depends entirely on what you did before anyone asked. I still wear the jacket. I patched the elbow last spring with a piece of canvas I found in my grandmother's sewing kit. The same grandmother who used to say that the most important thing a person could develop was the ability to stay calm in a room that wasn't. I didn't understand what she meant when I was young. I think I understand it now. Steadiness is not the absence of fear. It's just fear that has learned to wait its turn.